He came to visit his son's grave, just like he had 100 times before, but this time someone was already there, a girl, alone, crying so hard it sounded like her soul was breaking. She was homeless. A stranger. But when he asked who she was, she looked up with swollen eyes and whispered something that froze him to his core. "I knew your son, and he saved me." What she revealed next shattered everything he thought he knew about his own child. A secret so powerful, so deeply human, it brought a millionaire to his knees and changed his life forever. This is not just a story about grief. It's a story about redemption, legacy, and the one quiet act of kindness that echoed across two broken lives. Don't blink, don't skip, because what happens next might just change you too. He thought the cemetery was empty. It was always empty this time of day, but that morning something was different. Something pulled him in, like a whisper from the wind that didn't want to be heard, but needed to be. It had been 3 years since his son was buried beneath that marble headstone, the same headstone he personally designed with trembling hands, tears in his eyes, and a heart shattered into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces. A father never forgets the weight of a child's death. It lingers like a ghost in the lungs, heavy and breathless, and yet, for all the grief he had carried, nothing could have prepared him for her. She was just a shadow at first, a small figure, crouched by the grave like a statue carved out of sorrow. Her clothes were torn, her hair matted with rain and dust, and her shoulders shook with every breath she took. But what haunted him most wasn't how she looked, it was how she cried. It wasn't the cry of someone mourning a stranger. It was deeper, it was personal. It was raw, breaking, collapsing. He stood there in silence for a few seconds, unsure whether to interrupt or walk away. He had come to speak to his son, something he hadn't done in months. But in that moment, something told him this girl had been doing the same thing. Perhaps every day he wasn't. He slowly approached, his footsteps soft against the wet earth. "Excuse me, are you okay?" She looked up. Her eyes were swollen, red like fire, not from sleep, but from grief that refused to let her rest. And for a few seconds, she didn't answer. She just stared at him. Like she recognized him. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean to be in your way." "In my way," he replied gently. "This is my son's grave." She nodded slowly. "I know." He froze. "You knew my son?" She didn't speak. She just placed a tiny folded note on the grave, one that looked like it had been opened and reread 100 times. The wind tried to steal it, but she held it down with a trembling hand before stepping back. He bent down and picked it up. The handwriting wasn't his son's, it was hers. "You were the only one who ever saw me. You didn't just give me food, you gave me dignity, and I will never forget that. Not even when I sleep on cold benches, not even when the world forgets me. You remembered me when no one else did, and I will remember you for the rest of my life." His hands trembled. He looked at her. "You wrote this?" She nodded barely. "I don't understand. Who are you?" She hesitated, then said something that sliced straight through the air. "I'm the girl your son saved when no one else even looked at me." He felt the ground sway beneath him. His son, Michael, had never told him about this. In the years after the accident, he had tried to piece together everything Michael had done in his final days. Friends came, people mourned, stories were shared. But this was different. "Tell me what happened," he whispered, suddenly desperate. She lowered herself back to the grass, hands clenched in her lap. "It was 3 years ago. I was 15. My mom was gone, my dad, if you can even call him that. He kicked me out after his 3rd overdose. I had nothing, no place, no name. I used to sleep behind diners. I used to steal food from gas stations. I didn't think anyone even saw me." Tears began to well in her eyes again. "But he did. Your son. One day I was sitting by that broken fence down by Lincoln Street. He saw me, but he didn't stare like the others. He didn't avoid me like I was trash. He walked right up, knelt beside me, and handed me his sandwich. I tried to run. I thought it was a trick, but he said, 'Please, I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to help.'" The millionaire swallowed hard, his throat dry, his heartbeat loud in his ears. He came back every day for a week. He never asked my name. He just listened. He let me talk. He let me cry. He gave me hope, and then he disappeared. I didn't know why until I saw his face on the news. The car crash. Her voice cracked at the last word. The pain that surged through the millionaire's chest was different than any grief he had felt before. It was pride. It was heartbreak. It was a bittersweet symphony playing in a storm of memories. I didn't even get to say thank you. She whispered. So I came here. I didn't know where else to go. He looked at her, really looked at her, a girl who had no roof, no family, no money. But somehow, she carried the memory of his son more closely than anyone else ever had. What's your name? He asked softly. She looked up. Emily. The name felt familiar, and then it clicked. Michael had once scribbled a name on a paper tucked in the back of his sketchbook. Emily reminded me to bring her lunch again. He never explained it. The millionaire never asked, but now, he knew that name echoed in his mind like a bell tolling through a quiet chapel. Michael had written it down once, a fleeting scribble in the corner of his sketchbook, almost forgotten, almost lost in the pages of a life cut too short. But now that single word had meaning. Now it had a face, a voice, a soul. He stared at her, this fragile girl wrapped in the storm of his past, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone at his son's grave. You kept coming here, he said gently, more a realization than a question. She nodded. Every week, sometimes every day, I talked to him, like he's still here, like he can still hear me. He glanced at the flowers she had laid. They were never his. He always thought the groundskeeper placed them out of pity or routine, but they were hers all this time. They were hers. Why didn't you come to me? He asked. Why didn't you say something? She looked down. What would I have said? That I was a homeless girl your son helped in secret, that I had no right to be here, but came anyway because it's the only place I've ever felt safe. The millionaire's heart cracked further. Safe? She felt safe, next to the resting place of his son, not in a shelter, not on the streets, not in the broken corners of the world that had forgotten her, but here beside the memory of a boy who showed her kindness when the world only gave her cruelty. He sat beside her on the cold ground, the suit he wore now meaningless, the money he had in the bank irrelevant, the board meetings, the yachts, the applause, nothing mattered more than this moment. I never really knew who my son was in his final days, he whispered. After his mother passed, he changed. He stopped coming to events. He stopped calling back. I thought he was shutting down. Maybe he was. Or maybe he was just waking up to a world I had spent my whole life ignoring. Emily stayed quiet, but the silence between them was no longer uncomfortable, it was sacred. Two broken hearts beating in the same rhythm. After a few minutes, he asked, Where are you staying now? She shrugged. Wherever I can, bus stops, old buildings. Some nights I find a shelter, most nights I don't, doesn't matter. It matters to me, he said firmly. She turned to him, confused. Why? He looked at her eyes glassy, voice raw. Because if my son gave you his heart, then I owe you mine. The wind picked up. The trees above rustled like they were bearing witness to something holy, something bigger than grief, bigger than status, bigger than the distance between a mansion and a sidewalk. You don't have to do that, she whispered. I never asked for help. I never expected anything. But you deserve it, he said. Michael didn't just help you because you were in need. He helped you because he saw you. He saw something I never did. I want to see it too. Tears began to pool again in her eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from something deeper, something long forgotten. Hope. That evening, for the first time in years, the millionaire didn't drive home alone. Emily sat in the passenger seat of his black sedan, clutching the note she had left on Michael's grave. She didn't speak much, neither did he, but the silence between them no longer screamed, it sang. He didn't take her to a shelter. He didn't drop her off with a few dollar bills and a pat on the back. He brought her home. The gates to his estate opened slowly, as if even they weren't sure what was happening. The marble floors, the grand chandelier. The house that once echoed with loneliness now welcomed something new, something alive. She looked overwhelmed, out of place, small, but he looked at her and smiled. You're not charity. He said, "Your family." She looked away quickly, trying to hide the emotion, but he noticed. He always would now. In the days that followed, the house changed. He found her curled up in Michael's old reading room, surrounded by his books. She touched them like they were sacred, like they still carried pieces of him. And maybe they did. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't take advantage. She simply existed quietly, respectfully, as if afraid she might wake from a dream she didn't deserve. But slowly, she bloomed. He enrolled her in school again, got her proper clothes, a warm bed, a door that locked not to keep her in, but to finally make her feel safe. And as days turned to weeks, something extraordinary happened. She started painting, at first, just sketches on napkins, then on canvas, then on the walls of the garden. He watched from a distance as color returned to her world and unknowingly to his as well. One afternoon, he found a painting on Michael's old easel, a simple image, a boy handing a sandwich to a girl sitting on cracked pavement. He couldn't look away. "That's the first day I met him," she said quietly from behind him. "I didn't know what to draw, so I drew what saved me." The millionaire turned, his voice almost gone. "Thank you for remembering him that way." She smiled softly. "No, thank you for remembering me." The days passed and the mansion no longer felt cold. The halls that once echoed with silence now held the quiet sound of brushes on canvas, pages turning, and sometimes soft laughter that hadn't lived there in years. Emily never tried to replace Michael. She couldn't, she didn't want to, but in her own way, she brought him back through memory, through story, through color. Each morning, the millionaire would pass by the garden and watch her paint, not because he wanted to supervise her, but because she was healing, and in her healing, he was healing too. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the trees, casting golden light across the stone path, he walked into the living room and saw something he hadn't seen in over 3 years, a birthday cake. It was simple, small, iced by hand, uneven, imperfect, and written across it in shaky letters were the words, "Happy birthday, Michael." Emily stood beside it, holding 2 candles in her hand. "I know it's silly," she said, avoiding eye contact, "but I never got to say it. I don't know if anyone did." His throat tightened. "You remembered his birthday." She nodded. "I never forgot." He stepped closer. "Neither did I. I just never had the courage to face it." They lit the candles. No song, no clapping. Just 2 hearts standing over a cake made not for celebration, but for remembrance. And as the flame flickered, something broke inside him, not in a painful way, but in a way that allowed the light to finally come through. He looked at her. "You've given me more of my son than the world ever did." She looked back, her eyes glassy. "And you gave me a life I never thought I'd live." Then, without either of them planning it, they said it at the same time, "Thank you." In the weeks that followed, word quietly began to spread, not from him, not from press releases or staged interviews, but from the people in town who started seeing the millionaire differently. He was no longer just the man behind the glass walls of his estate. He was the man helping serve meals at the local shelter, the man quietly funding art classes for homeless youth, the man who sat for hours just listening to teenagers who thought no one saw them. All because of her. Emily had changed everything, not through power or pressure, but through presence. One day, she sat across from him at the long dining table that used to feel so empty, now warmed by fresh food and light conversation. She put down her fork, took a breath, and said, "I want to tell my story, the whole thing, not just mine, Michael's too." He leaned in. "Why?" "Because there are thousands of kids like me out there," she said, "and millions of people like you, who don't know how much of a difference they could make. Maybe if they hear it, maybe if they see what Michael did for me, they'll start to believe that one act of kindness can still change a life." He nodded slowly, then reached across the table and took her hand. "Then let's tell it." And they did, not for attention, not for sympathy, but for legacy. Together, they started a foundation, Michael's Light. Its mission was simple: find the forgotten, feed the hungry, give shelter to the invisible, and most of all, listen to the broken hearted before the world silences them forever. Emily spoke at schools, at fundraisers, at youth centers. Her words weren't rehearsed or polished. They were raw, real, and when she told the story of how a stranger's sandwich and a listening ear saved her from giving up, grown men cried. And when she said the words, "He saved me without asking for anything in return," even the coldest rooms fell silent. The millionaire watched from the side of every stage, tears quietly falling down his face. Not tears of grief anymore, but tears of purpose, because now, his son lived on in ways even death couldn't stop. One afternoon, Emily stood once again at Michael's grave. But this time, she wasn't alone in her pain. This time, she held a letter just like before, but with different words. "Michael, today I stood in front of 500 students and told them about you. I told them how you saw me when no one else did. I told them that kindness isn't something big or loud, it's in the little things. A meal, a moment, a memory. I hope you're proud, because I am who I am. Because of who you were." She placed the letter on the headstone gently, kissed her fingers, and pressed them to the stone. Behind her, the millionaire stood quietly, hands in his coat pockets, a soft smile on his face. "You're not that homeless girl anymore," he said. "You're something more." She turned, smiling. "I'm just someone he believed in." He nodded, "And now, so do I." They walked away together, side by side. Two people forever changed by a boy whose kindness echoed far beyond his years. And somewhere in the quiet wind, it felt like Michael was still watching, still listening, still smiling. Sometimes, the people the world forgets are the ones who carry its greatest stories. Emily was never meant to be a headline. She was never meant to be a lesson. She was just a girl lost, broken, unseen. And yet, from the shadows of her pain, something beautiful emerged. A reason to keep going, a legacy to protect, a promise to fulfill. She didn't have riches, but she had something richer than wealth: memory. The memory of a boy who sat beside her when the world walked past. The memory of a hand stretched out, not to save, but to stand beside. Michael didn't change the world with speeches or money. He did it with presence. He gave a piece of himself to someone who had nothing left, and that small act became a ripple that would never stop growing. Now that ripple had become a wave. The foundation they built in his name, Michael's light, had already helped hundreds of forgotten kids find their way back home, back to safety, back to being seen. And every time someone asked why it existed, Emily would look them in the eye and say, "Because one person saw me, and it saved my life." The millionaire, once hardened by grief, once closed off behind stone walls and silent dinners, now smiled more, laughed more. He had found something he never thought he'd feel again. Peace, because grief is a strange companion. It never leaves, but it softens, and through Emily's healing, he had finally found something stronger than pain: purpose. Years passed. Emily grew into a powerful voice for the voiceless. Not a victim of her past, but a warrior because of it. She didn't just survive, she became living proof that the smallest act of kindness can light up even the darkest life. And on what would have been Michael's 25th birthday, they returned once more to the grave, not in mourning, but in gratitude. She placed one last letter, now laminated so the rain couldn't steal it. "You were just a boy with a sandwich, but to me, you were a lifeline, and now I carry your light everywhere I go. I'll never let it go out, I promise." The millionaire placed a single white rose beside her. No words, just silence, and in that silence, something sacred passed between them. Not grief, not pain, but peace. They walked away slowly, hand in hand, no camera crews, no applause. Just two people, one once broken by loss, the other once forgotten by the world, both forever changed by the kindness of a boy who never needed recognition to change a life, and somewhere, far beyond what eyes can see, Michael smiled.